Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another video on HVSBL podcast. Today I'm joined by Stephen Nelson and Dr. Dennis MacDonald. And we're going to have a bit of ground to cover as we're going to be discussing a bit about Ammon Hillman, some of the claims that he makes about the Bible. You know, some of the very controversial things he claims about Jesus. He says some pretty extreme things there. And to that end, Stephen, why don't you provide a quick introduction as to what exactly we're talking about here regarding Ammon Hillman?
Yeah, well, first of all, I am approaching this as an amateur. So I'm an amateur researcher, an enthusiast who is very interested in digging down into the original meaning of the Bible. I am, like Ammon Hillman, I am very much a Greek enthusiast, but I don't have a PhD. So I have to basically check all of his claims against the original texts, which if you really listen to him, and this has sort of grown into this big research project, where after his initial interview blew up in May, and he was making very wild claims that were very much against the grain of mainstream scholarship, the core of his claim is that he is ostensibly not putting any spin on anything, right? This is not his opinion. This is not something that he's adding to the text. He is simply extracting the original meaning out of the text. And the only reason his interpretations are drastically different from all of the established translations of the Bible, pick one, they're all very different. He claims that is because they are all mistranslated, right? So he is the only person with this knowledge of how to properly translate the Hellenistic Greek of the New Testament because of his grounding in the classics. And one of the things that he argues is that Bible scholars in general are pretty much incompetent when it comes to interpreting and translating Greek. Because this is where we're going to bring Dennis in, because he claims that Bible scholars, because they do not read outside, allegedly, they do not read outside of the New Testament, they do not read Plutarch, they do not read Lucian, they do not read, Plato, Aristotle, or the medical texts specifically, so they don't read Galen, because they are ignorant, supposedly, of all of this other extra biblical literature. They simply just go off the rails mistranslating the Bible. So that is something that I think Dr. MacDonald might agree with that to some extent, that there is a problem of a sort of general ignoring of extra biblical literature. But to say that Bible scholars are just completely, like the ones who are translating the Bible, the ones who are writing the commentaries, are totally ignorant of the classics, I would love to get Dr. MacDonald's feedback on that particular claim.
Well, first of all, I think, Stephen, you're selling yourself short. I think you are an amazing researcher, and your Greek is competitive with almost anyone. And the viewers need to know that you actually speak modern Greek. You've taught your son Greek. You speak Greek at home. So you are not a neophyte when it comes to Greek philology.
Very honored.
So, but I don't think I'm a novice either. And I think the issue with my guild, that is New Testament scholarship in particular, is not that these scholars don't know how to read Greek. It's what Greek they're going to read. So we have a stovepipe attitude toward the Bible that connects the New Testament to Hebrew Bible and not to the classical world, which is the world actually the authors live in. And my specialty is in Greek poetry, which is a genre that is almost universally rejected. And I call that Homerophobia. I want to say one more thing about our discussion today. We're going to be talking about homosexuality and transsexuality, and this is not a pan against modern homosexuality or trans experience. We're historians, and we're trying to make the best sense of complex texts, this is not a judgment on modern sexual ethics. It's a judgment on historical investigation. And I'm hoping my colleagues agree with that assessment, that this needs to be judged not in terms of modern morality, but in terms of ancient integrity.
Well, I have a few questions. Well, first of all, let's lay the groundwork for anybody who has not heard of Dr. Hillman or his claims, right? So I have a short list of a few things that he claims. The first one is, it's all focused in Mark 14, right? So Mark 14, 51, and 52, there's a linchpin here where he basically translates a particular passage of this text that we can discuss a little bit. So in Greek, it's kenianiskos tis, so in some young man, synakoluthi αυτό, so is following Jesus, or perivevlimenos syndona, so wrapped in a cloth, epihymnou, around his naked body. Και κρατούσαν αυτόν, ο δεκάτα λοιπόν την σύντονα γυμνός έφυγαν. So when they go to apprehend the boy, his garment falls off and he runs away naked. So Dr. Hillman has a particular translation of this, which is basically that the young boy was assigned to him, synakoluthi αυτό. And he believes that this is in some way, suggests that Jesus was trafficking this boy. He wasn't just molesting the boy. That this language somehow is insinuating a deeper sort of sinister nature of this. Having wrapped his penis with a medicated bandage, right? So the claim is based on the fact that the sindon, that is effectively, it's translated as garment. And the funny thing is that in the interview with Danny Jones, when they pull up the entry from the LSJ, there is clearly a definition under it that says garment.
A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus when they seized him. That's all it says.
Yeah. Now look at the Greek.
Oh, yeah.
And it says, a young boy was assigned to him, having wrapped his penis with a medicated bandage, and they arrested him.
A medicated bandage is what it says.
Sindon, yeah. I've got the...
Okay, so I'm comparing yours to what this one says. So
the entry from the LSJ, there is clearly a definition under it that says garment. But he literally says that is an incompetent, incorrect translation, because you can find this linen, the sindon, the linen cloth, referenced in other passages outside of the Bible to a bandage.
No text, and this right here is the translation that we have right now, which is, I'll punch it up for people, nothing but a linen garment.
Yeah, notice how they took it from a bandage and turned it into...
Who did this? Who's responsible for this?
Crappy translators.
Because sometimes linen cloths were used as bandages. So his logic, like if you really follow his logic, it's that you can find texts where the linen cloth is used as a bandage.
And surgeons' bandages.
Mm-hmm, and bandages, and that's where I get it. On my end, when I'm reading the medical authors, they're all saying that you impregnate linen.
Therefore, it can't be translated as garment. In this context, it must be a bandage that was wrapped around epihymnou, around his around his penis. So
but it also means shroud.
Shroud, and yes, Jesus' shroud that was wrapped around his entire body is the exact same word.
Yeah.
And so that is a problem that he doesn't address. He would probably not like to address it, or he would just say that, okay, well, in that context it works. But in this context, he wants to basically say that the neaniskos implies, because it is a diminutive of the word neanis, the young man, it means that he is a prepubescent boy. That's the first thing. There are other instances of pediska or paidiska or pediski in other forms of Greek, which is a diminutive of pes, and he believes that also refers to underage prepubescent female prostitutes. So he draws the connection there, that basically if you're using a diminutive form, like, what would you say? What's an example in English of a diminutive?
The lesser.
Yeah. So it's like I don't know, a boy and like a little boy, right? Yeah. So he's saying that this is a little boy. That sindon is a linen bandage that is impregnated with drugs. This is his words. And that crappy translators, people who do not use Greek, who do not work with the Greek, took it from a bandage and turned it into a garment in an act of intentional stupidity as a result of their bad training. And that epihymnou means around his private parts and not around his naked body, and it's debatable whether or not he was actually full-blown nude under the garments or if he was like in undergarments, or what nude actually means in this context is also debatable. But that's sort of the baseline of his argument around that particular verse in that particular section of Mark 14. So any comments on that, Dr. MacDonald?
I'm going to talk about a character that appears in the Odyssey, who's called Neanias. He's a young man. He dies, and his soul goes to Hades, where Odysseus is going to meet him. Ancient artists depicted this young man nude. And the reason they did so is that he's been denuded of a body. Because when the soul went to Hades, it fled the body. And to capture that, and it's clear. I mean, we have pictures of this fellow Elpenor, which means wants to be a man, and Agenor. So we have pictures of a naked young man. Now, this is the same young man now that is clothed at the empty tomb. So I'll say something about that later. But the idea that you have, so the boy is nude, and he's leaving his shroud behind as a symbol probably of his identification through baptism with Jesus' death and resurrection. And we know that was important for initians, male initians, in the early church. So far, Stephen is right on target. And this business about gymnos is not about sex. It's about death. Mm. And you have this character. In my books, I have pictures of this Elpenor who's nude, and the artists do it because he's been denuded of his body. And when he then so I'll say more about it later, Stephen.
Okay. I would like to get your comments also on Adela Yarbrough Collins' commentary on Mark. I have a quotation from her regarding verses 51 and 52. She says, in the only other place in Mark where the word neaniskos, young man, is used is 16:5. And in verse 51, the young man is introduced in a way that signifies that he's not yet been mentioned in the story, right? Because it's neaniskostis, right? Like, so he appears during the arrest, right? Jesus has his event in the garden. He comes out, and all of a sudden, neaniskostis, some young boy, appears. So that in and of itself, for me personally as a Greek reader, refutes the idea that the boy could have possibly been with Jesus in the garden. Because from a narrative perspective, he's first appearing at that point in the narrative. And what Dr. Collins further says is that the phrase sinokolutheafto could be translated as was accompanying him, or was following him, or was attempting to accompany or follow him. And the significance could be either that the young man was in the entourage of Jesus up to the time of his arrest, or that Jesus was arrested. He tried to follow, the boy tried to follow him by joining the group, taking him away. And that the word sindon may be translated as a piece of linen cloth or garment made of linen. And that this word occurs twice in this passage and twice in 1546. These are the only places where it occurs in Mark. And the phrase perivevlimenos synthona epihymnou is ambiguous.
And epivlepenos appears also in chapter 16.
Yeah,
Now
wrapped.
he's wrapped in a white robe, like after a baptism, that you would put on a clean garment. I would disagree, though, with Adela's, and she was one of my teachers, by the way, and she's a good friend. I was just with her a couple of hours ago. I would disagree with her because the word alakaluthe and agatheo is how the disciples are called. They are followers of Jesus. And what happens just before verse 51 in chapter 14 is that the disciples all flee, and this young man had been following Jesus too. So he's another of the disciples who's fleeing. So I think that the apokalouthen is related to his being a disciple.
Synakoluthi. Yeah, synakoluthi.
That's right.
Yeah.
Synakoluthi means to be an associate with,
and
follower with.
I think the issue is that Dr. Hillman really makes a big deal about this, but it's really basic. It's akulutheo is like I follow. Synakolutheo means follow with. It's like you don't really need to read that deep into it.
That's right. He's another follower.
He's a follower who is just sort of like conjoined. But I find it compelling that he just appears at this particular section because Jesus says, have you, and this is the ESV, like, and Jesus said to them, have you come out as against a robber, osepilistin, right? So, with swords and clubs to capture me. Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. And a young man followed him, right? Like just out of the blue, a young man appears and follows him. Before that, it's very clear that what Jesus is saying is that, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? This is something that Dr. Hillman makes a really big deal about, is the word listis, or lestes, or he says lestes. He believes that a lestes, or a listis, is a pirate that was basically, it implies a human trafficker. Because back then, those bandits or robbers, or however it gets translated, the underlying term listis implies that the person was engaged in human trafficking and child molestation. Just by the very fact that Jesus is saying, well, have you come out against me as if I am a lestes, right? Jesus is denying being a lestes, but he's saying it in the context of, have you come out against me with swords and clubs to capture me? So my reading of this, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that what Jesus is saying is that why did you bring the cavalry? Basically, why did you roll up on me with all of these, like, with weapons, as if I were a violent perpetrator of if I were a violent criminal? You don't need to do that to me. I've been in the temple. You could have seized me a long time ago. This is an undue use of force in this arrest. Like that's what he's objecting to. He's not saying you're coming at me as if I'm a human trafficking child molester, right? There's no connection here between the young boy and Jesus' activity and his status, and his denying the fact that he's a lestes. I think the context of what Mark means by this word is very, very clear, and I don't think that Dr. Hillman has a license to extend that meaning so far.
The word really is used as criminal.
Yes.
And we don't know what the crime is. And Jesus is saying, I'm not a criminal.
Yeah.
And again, I could give you a Homeric background to that, but we don't need to go there at this point.
He jumps around with two different Greek texts to claim this is how the Greek word is used over here, and then he uses it as a basis to say this other Greek text must be using it in the same way.
Exactly. Yeah, he defers to Lucian, Alexander the false prophet, for giving in the introduction the exact definition that he's using for these days.
Can you talk about that? Who is Alexander? Was Alexander the false prophet a real person, or was this just a story?
Yeah, no, he's a real person, and Lucian is a real person writing about another real person in Cappadocia, up on the Black Sea again. They're up on the Black Sea. And he started a cult, an oracular cult, and he's called Lucian says, look, I hate to write to you about bad people. History should be all full of good people. Right, but just like this other guy, he says, wrote about this Laestes, I'm going to write to you about a Laestes that is like he's the worst.
It gets translated in the Loeb edition of this work as brigand, which I don't even know what that means in English. But I've read it, and I'm going to be dissecting it in detail on the Myth Vision podcast special that I'm going to be working on with Derek, and I can verify that I do not find anything in there that indicates that Laestes is a sex trafficker or a child molester. There are some pretty damning things about Alexander the false prophet that Lucian, this is a hit piece on this guy that Lucian wrote, and he does call him a Laestes, but it's just, I just don't find the context that he's claiming is there.
Right.
But I do know that there are, many different the people that
Theseus
takes on, right? Like those are also Laestes. Like Laestes are like very common sort of antagonists in Greek prose, and right, like
it's criminals who are involved with some kind of fiduciary irresponsibility.
So what is in a nutshell, like what is this young boy doing in the scene, abruptly appearing? Why is he naked? Like what is your reading on this? Because Dr. Collins' commentary sort of everybody keeps it pretty ambiguous. Like not a lot of people have a good explanation for what this is, and I know you have a literary explanation for this.
Well, if this is the time to talk about it, I'd be happy to.
Please.
But I need to start with the Odyssey. Odysseus learns from Circe after a feast that he has to go to Hades to consult with the blind seer Tiresias in order to get home. When he learns that he has to go to Hades, he says that I wanted to give up on life. In other words, he'd still get to Hades, but he'd get to Hades in that way dead. Jesus, after the Last Supper with his disciples, goes to Gethsemane, and he says he's sorrowful even unto death. And then he prays his prayer. Now, Odysseus, when he's with Circe after the feast, is the only one awake because all of his buddies are sleeping off the drunk and the feast that night. And so at the end of it, he says, wake up, we're off on our way to Hades. Jesus goes to his sleeping disciples and says, wake up. It's time for us to go, and Jesus is going to then be going to his death. But the issues don't end there. Elpenor, who got too drunk, was sleeping off his drunk at Circe's roof. And he falls and he breaks his neck, and his soul flees to Hades, and his body is left behind. He's fleeing, his soul is fleeing from his body. It's at that point when Judas arrives, this young boy, and it's a Neanias or Neaniskos in the two. I mean, it's so obvious that you have this flight, and then Odysseus goes to the netherworld. He finds his friend Elpenor. Elpenor says, please go back and bury my body. Odysseus does so at dawn, and everybody is weeping because this young man lost his life. What happens in Mark is this young man flees, but he reappears in the tomb. And now it's a matter of joy because the disciples are supposed to learn that Jesus has been raised from the dead. But the women do not transmit the message that they were told by the young. So the young man in the tomb is the same man who fled. He flees naked, he comes back, and he's wearing a white robe to symbolize resurrection. And he's giving a witness to the resurrection. Now, this may seem far-fetched, but I would encourage people to take a look at my synopses of epic tragedy in the Gospels for the parallels. They're really quite striking.
Between the boy and then the young man in the tomb.
And the whole context of here you have a meal, you have sleeping associates, you have a hero who finds out who knows he's got to go to Hades, he despairs of life, he wakes his buddies up, there's a young man who's involved, so the parallels are really quite dense. And ancient readers who were sensitive to the Homeric background, I think, would make that association, and they would not see anything related to sexuality.
Yeah. Well, I think so there's also ancient interpretations of this that Dr. Collins mentions in her commentary. So one, she said, Epiphanius identified the young man as James, the brother of the Lord. Ambrose, John Chrysostom, and Bede identified him as John, the son of Zebedee. The anonymous author of the 7th century commentary on Mark that was attributed to Jerome in the Middle Ages says regarding the passage, this is proper to Mark. This is like the case of Joseph who, leaving behind his tunic, fled in the nude from the hands of the shameless mistress of the house. It goes on. What do you think was the ancient sort of patristic mindset in interpreting this sort of,
this strange young man is unnamed, and so he's really quite mysterious. And all of these are guesses. They're trying to find some name to put to it, but there's no name. It's a made-up character.
Okay. I think that was the main thing we wanted to touch upon regarding Mark 14. There's a lot of other stuff that I'm going to be getting into in detail on the piece I'm putting together for Myth Vision podcast, but I know that Dr. MacDonald's input was very valuable on specifically on the Mark 14 thing, which is only one aspect of this discussion.
I'm so grateful to have this conversation with the two of you because I think it's an ideal example of how differently the Christian church has read their texts from how these texts were produced. They were produced for a different readership than the church and scholars too. So I don't think we're ever going to realize until let me put it a different way. I think scholars of the Gospels are forever going to be hindered if they don't take Greek poetry into the context. Homer was the center of ancient Greek education. There's no doubt about it. And mimesis was largely of poetry into prose, so that even because we have different genres, scholars have been nervous about going from poetry to prose. And you yourself know that Homeric Greek is more difficult than Koine Greek, and the tragedians are even worse. So it's hard work to put these together. And also, they're not philological. It's a comparison of narrative and characterization, and not just a philology. I would say, actually, mimesis is a part of the philological project. But I'm so glad that we can talk about it, because these things are going to remain mysteries, and not just this young man. But I think so much of the Gospels cannot be understood without understanding Greek poetry.
Well, and just for sheer entertainment and shock value, I will read a few more of the claims about this passage before the boy is introduced, right? So I believe these are more or less verbatim quotes that I took down of Dr. Hillman's translation of Mark 14:51. So he says that when Jesus first walks into the garden, he falls over in pain, going through the exact same symptoms that doctors describe of the drug purple, porphyra.
That's on there, right? Why? Why is Jesus with the kid? Remember when he first walks in the garden, he falls over, he stumbles over, and he's in pain. He's going through the exact same symptoms that doctors will describe.
Jesus is?
Of the drug users. Yeah, it's in this chapter. It's in Mark 14.
Jesus is experiencing some kind of psychotic fear. Jesus is with this kid at the time, so he's bringing the kid in before he's ever introduced in the narrative, in the garden. Jesus is rolling around in agony in order to get the galini, which he says is the sperm of this child, from the boy as an antidote to this poison that he is suffering from side effects of. He doesn't say if it's Jesus or the kids, he ends up with big drops of the stuff on his face that are, I guess, purple colored. Jesus needs to get the antidote from the kid's genitalia, which he calls galini, based on a passage in Galen I'm going to go over, which is the kid's semen. But Jesus does not get the antidote, which is why, according to Nonus, that is corroborated, he says that the disciples were attempting to give Jesus the antidote on a sponge, the vinegar, as a remedy for this snake venom, and so this is what he says is going on in the passage when Jesus is greatly distressed and troubled, and worried about the execution he's going to endure. Apparently, he's actually just under the influence of a drug that he needs to cure himself of by extracting semen from the young boy. What are your thoughts on that reading of this text?
Dennis?
He doesn't deserve the word scholar.
Yeah.
Okay, he's not a scholar. He's an apologist for a certain ethic, and it is difficult to hear it because it is so abusive. And it does not do justice to the gay and lesbian community to have an apologist like this who's so outrageous. And I feel for people who fall for those kinds of ploys. Really, I do.
Yeah, and I think it says something about our culture that when somebody comes out with a theory like that, that's very sensational, that just comes out the gate saying, Jesus was a child molester, that gets so much attention online and garners instant, within a few weeks, he had over 1 million views. People just eat it up. He got so many people asking him to sign up for his online Greek classes that he couldn't even accept any more applicants. The YouTube channel blew up. People get famous on this kind of stuff, and the actual work that gets done in the field in peer-reviewed scholarship with a lot of rigor that doesn't get the spotlight and doesn't have such catchy, ideas, doesn't get the light of day. And somehow this ends up getting, a lot of the limelight. And all we can do is just sort of try to combat it with factual, information. But it's pretty astounding that this actually.
Well,
is
I
getting
thank
this
you
much
for
mileage.
doing the hard philology. That's an important part of the solution.
I'd like to ask both of you about the Secret Gospel of Mark, because he also includes Secret Mark to try to support his what seems to me to be a deliberate misinterpretation of the Gospel of Mark, and I think you both would agree with that he's reinterpreting the text to support his outrageous claims.
Is it Secret Gospel of Mark that he appeals to, or?
I know he's brought it up in the past.
I want to cut to the chase on this one. Look at this. This is, I don't want to talk about the background of this thing whatsoever. People classify it as pseudo-Clement. You can take that and do with it what you want. I'm interested in the language here and what the Greek is saying. So, so hoide mathetai, epitimestai aute kai orgistes ho Jesus. Jesus is mad, man, right off the bat. And he came back with her, this woman, to the garden. Where was the Nemeon? Where was the cemetery? Yeah. And right away he heard from the cemetery, right, from this tomb, phone megale, a great voice, and approaching. Yeah, Jesus moved off the stone from the doorway of the tomb, and entering in there, right there, was this Neaniskos. You can see this on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th line down. Neaniskos. See the Neaniskos?
Yeah, I see it, yeah.
Okay, and there was a Neaniskos there, and what is he doing? He's stretching out his hand and waking him up. Isn't that cool? He's waking him. Wait, do you realize that we heard a voice and we entered a tomb where a kid has to be roused? Where he has to be roused.
I think it's actually, what I've heard him appeal to is the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, but when I dug into it, it seemed to me like it was the Proto-Evangelion of James and the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew.
Well, but Morton Smith, in his Secret Gospel of Mark and other books, has made a similar claim to Hillman's. And I have a personal story to tell about this. I was teaching at the New York Union Theological Seminary across the street from Columbia University, where Smith taught. I was asked by him to give a lecture at Columbia, and we sat at dinner together at the Columbia Faculty Club and had an amicable dinner. And I gave my lecture, and I gave this interpretation of the young man at fleeing at Jesus' arrest. Morton Smith got up and reamed me out for 10 minutes, not with good argumentation, but because he knew that if I was right, his theory about the young man at the tomb was wrong. And Morton Smith himself was gay. And that's public knowledge, and that is not a problem for me. But it's too easy for biblical scholars to insert their own values into their interpretation, and then it becomes unfortunate. 2 weeks after this encounter, Morton Smith died. And one of his students said, "MacDonald, you killed him," because he died of a coronary, and he got up and was just reaming me out. Now, I didn't kill him, and I don't think that could have been a modest cause. And by the way, I was involved in packaging up his books to distribute to libraries and to doctoral students, so I got pretty close to him, even after his death. But this passage, because it's enigmatic, invites bizarre interpretations that have to do with young boys naked, and it's too bad that it's come to that.
What was his interpretation? I mean, you said it's similar to Hillman's.
He does not. He implies that there is a nocturnal tryst between Jesus and the naked young man.
In the garden just before, in the scene before?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So, essentially, Hillman's just picking up on that?
Yeah, he's doing something like that too. And when I edit it, I'm going to go find the video and put little clips so everybody can see that, yes, he has used Secret Mark in the past. I'm pretty sure I remember him. Now, does he use it extensively? No. He doesn't bring it up all the time. He just brought it up here and there. But, yes, Stephen, he does use, as you've shown, he does use other literature for the most part. The Secret Mark was a side thing he brought up to try to support his interpretation of what's going on in Mark 14 with the young man.
Well, another interesting thing is that he mentions that when Judas kisses him,
the word to kiss is phileo. right? We get all our Phil words from that. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, right? Phileo means to kiss. So if I were nice Roman, skirt-wearing Roman, I may walk up to you when I met you and kiss you. You know, do you mind if I kiss you? That's phileo. Then there's kata phileo. Kata is an intensifier. So it takes it to the level of you and I French. I meet you.
Like making out.
Give you a nice big kiss.
Now, what about like, does it discern from one person just kissing versus them kissing together? Like both kissing each other?
It changes.
Is that
No, it's the degree of amorousness that's involved. Like the degree that Jesus had with Judas.
Right.
When he kissed Jesus.
We'll get there.
That because when he greets him and he says Rabbi, and then he katafilisen afton, he believes that the intensifier kata that gets attached to phileo to make it like katafilisen, he not only does he think that Judas was like a prepubescent young boy, he thinks that the fact that he kisses him intensely in that scene to identify him to be arrested, that he literally translates that as like he made out with Jesus, like he romantically kisses Jesus.
Kataphilicin is simply the word for kissing.
Yes, I know. But he reads into everything, and with the claim that this is just a mundane, straightforward translation. I'm not putting any spin on this.
Okay, it is an intensive.
Yeah.
Because kisi is an Homeric word for kissing. It's not katakisi. So yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't he also, I think I recall that he also claimed that the disciples were children as well.
Oh yeah.
Let's get some context to this. So who was Jesus and why, and what is so good, what is so great about him?
Yeah, Jesus is a guy who walked around with 12 children and
all the time.
And prophets and a group of prophets. No, I'm just telling you what the text says.
He was just a guy who walked around with
Prostitutes and children.
So what was so great about him?
He called his disciples and he calls them his children constantly, right? Remember, God.
So he's a pimp.
God blesses those who take care of the children, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
He takes care of these children.
He takes care of these children.
Okay.
There is a female underage called the Paidiska. When Jesus Christ is in his trial, his followers won't admit they're his followers.
You think, and Jesus does call them pedia. He calls them children, my children, right? This is like a sort of teacher-student relationship that I'm also going to be discussing, like how this worked in the ancient world. I'm sure.
Here's a mistranslation also of the word mathetis, that is disciple. There is no place in the Septuagint or in Christian literature prior to Mark where the disciples are, the Log of Jesus, the Q document, is the first place where Jesus's disciples are identified as matheti. Mm-hmm. In classical literature, that almost always means student. So Jesus calls his 12 students to follow him. Now, later on, it becomes more like religious devotees. Yeah. So by the time you get to the Acts of the Apostles, the word has changed. But originally, it means students. And it falls into this issue of paideia and so on, too.
Yeah.
Well,
all the material.
You. Yeah.
I'm going to be getting into a lot more detail, but there were definitely a few key points that I wanted to touch on with you with regard to that particular passage and the Greek used.
Well, great.
Do you have to go, Dennis?
I have to go in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can hang on for a little bit.
All right. Well, I was gonna ask like maybe one or two more questions before we turn off the recording. He also brings up the purple. Ammon brings up the purple. He has a different take on purple. So, in the gospel it talks about Jesus wearing a purple cloak. He's saying the purple was some kind of drug that would be put on the faces of children.
That's exactly what this verse says right here. It says...
Can you zoom in on that a little bit?
Yeah, can we...
There you go. There you go. You just did it.
Yeah, and so he's... what happened? So Jesus is there, and it says the kid dropped the bandage and ran off naked. That's exactly what that says. The
Okay.
kid dropped the bandage and ran off naked.
Okay.
Stuff that is like big drops of porphyrin.
I'm talking about bodily fluids.
Blood is how
Blood.
it's typically, no, that's how it's translated. It's not the blood that he's got, it's purple. And he's got an antidote from the kid's. That's the galene, is the kid's semen. Heracles has to have Hylas. He has to have his boy. Zeus has to have Ganymede. On the Priapeic side, they call it Ganymede's. And the question is, do you drink from Ganymede's?
All right, bring me back down to earth here. What's going on in the park again? So Jesus has the purple on his face.
Yeah, he's got the purple on his face.
So Jesus is having some sort of a psychotic fit, right?
He's having some kind of overwhelming emotional state that's hitting him so hard, he's falling on the ground. So he's got something on board that's causing him to stumble.
And it's 4 a.m. in the morning?
It's 4 a.m. Yeah.
And he's got and who
he just came from
who wrote this, by the way?
Party with the kids. He just came from
Did
the
one
party.
of the cops write this? One of the cops that arrested him?
No, this is Mark. Yeah.
Mark was there.
Well, no, Mark is telling you the secret things that you're not supposed to know.
Yeah, he's basically, I've looked into as many references as I could find of this porphyra, which is it can either refer to the dye that was extracted from these mollusks all the way back for, as much as history as we have in the Greek world. Those mollusks were common sea creatures, and it was known in as far back as we can tell that you could hit those things and get purple dye out of them that could be used to dye clothing.
Yeah.
Right, and because it was so labor intensive, you had to kill one of those to dye like a little patch of a garment, and so you had to kill hundreds of them to produce fabric in the volume that you would need to actually like run a fabric trade. And so it was very common in the ancient world, and it was very expensive due to the labor-intensive nature of the production of those purple garments. You might know this off the top of your head, but the color of Jesus's garment changes from gospel to gospel through the synopsis. So in one case, his garments are kokina. In another case, they're porphyrea, and then and I think there are even another color. There are different colors of sort of on the spectrum between red and scarlet and purple. And so the kokino would be like more of a Roman. I think that's Luke, right? Like the kokinon, if I recall. That would be the color that like the Roman aristocracy would be associated with, the military class. The purple would mean that basically they're clothing him in a way that gives him the trappings of regency, of being a royal. Right, that's the whole point.
There's a debate about that, and I come out a little differently on that. If you take a look at poet of art for Dionysus, he's always has a himation, a robe that is porphyros, that is purple. And it's because he's the god of wine.
Yeah.
So that's fair enough. Now, it also is, because it's rare and expensive, it also is identified with royalty. So you do have that connection. But clearly in the Gospel of John, when there's a big point made that he is wearing purple and he's coming out and he has a wreath of thorns, Dionysus has a wreath of ivy. or he has a grapevine. So Jesus is portrayed, yes, as a mock king. You have that in Mark, king of the Jews, and they beat him up and so on. But you also have that identified with Dionysus, with the crown of foliage and a purple himation. The word is used, by the way, himation.
Yeah. Yeah, I found the references. So it's in Mark 15:7 and 15:20, it's porphyra, right? He's the purple fabric. So
That's
the word
right.
purple
Right.
is used to refer to the fabric. In Matthew, it's scarlet robe, chlamyda kokinin. So that's the kokino, which is red in modern Greek. That's a brighter red.
Right, that's exactly right.
And then in Luke, it's just a fine robe with no color.
Right.
So it's a esthis lambra, so it's like bright. So he just neglects to give it a color at all. And then in John 19:2 and 19:5, it is again porphyra, and that's where it's himation.
Yep.
And so John is basically going back to Mark's original color, where Matthew departed from it, and Luke stayed neutral and didn't label it with a color. But there are also textual variants where they kind of we're trying to harmonize a little bit and trying to normalize those colors.
I want to say one more thing about Stephen. Stephen is checking his computer, on which he has some of his own creation, and he ought to say something about his projects.
Yeah, well, the project I'm working on right now with regard to Ammon Hillman is a slideshow that has currently 239 slides that I am curating for this video that I'm going to be producing for Mythfiction Podcast, because I'm trying to let the authors speak for themselves, right? Like, I'm not putting my own spin on this. I'm going to have the Greek text next to, established translations. This has all sort of been this really big research project. But I have compiled all of the notes that I've taken over the last 10 years on various subjects, and put together a lot of different scripts for, my YouTube channel, the Cross Bible YouTube channel. Go like and subscribe, please.
I'll link in the description so everybody can go find it.
And what I'm mainly working on, my passion project that I've been doing for the last decade, where I intend on funneling all of this research, is Cross Bible. So I have a sign that I've been carrying around SBL to advertise for this. So this is at crossbible.com, and it's just a little preview for people to go. You can subscribe for free, and it's currently all crowdfunded. I have the ability for people to sign up and subscribe for different kinds of tier. It's my de facto Patreon page, but aside from just asking people to support our mission, the goal is to grow the platform into a full-blown Bible study platform that's going to have modules for Greek.
And it's really quite astonishing.
So I'm here at SBL to talk to, I just met with the German Bible Society this morning, trying to get access to all the critical editions of the Greek Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and the Greek Septuagint, because I'm very passionate about providing access and tools for the Septuagint, which are severely lacking right now in the Bible study space, mainly because of this sort of adherence to the Hebrew Masoretic text, this strong a preference for the Hebrew Masoretic text that the authors of the New Testament didn't have.
Did you have another question for us?
Nope, that's it. And I want to thank you, Stephen and Dennis, for joining me today. And again, the link to the Cross Bible YouTube channel and the website will be all in the description below and in the pinned comment.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.